The terrifying history of the forgotten graveyard you were never told. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, their barren branches clawing at the sky like desperate hands reaching for salvation. Beneath them lay the forgotten graveyard, a place so steeped in mystery and dread that even the locals refused to speak of it. Nestled deep within the woods, far from the prying eyes of civilization, it was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the air was thick with an unnatural chill, and where the whispers of the past echoed in the silence. No one knew exactly when the graveyard had been abandoned. Some said it had been there since the early 1800s, a burial ground for the outcasts of society, criminals, paupers, and those accused of witchcraft. Others claimed it was much older, a sacred ground desecrated by settlers who ignored the warnings of the indigenous people. Whatever its origins, one thing was certain: the graveyard was cursed. The first omen. The first recorded incident occurred in 1872, when a group of loggers stumbled upon the graveyard while clearing trees for a new railway line. According to their accounts, the ground was littered with broken headstones, their inscriptions worn away by time. Strange symbols were carved into the larger stones, symbols that none of the men could recognize. One of the loggers, a man named Samuel Grayson, decided to take a small stone as a souvenir. That night, Samuel woke up screaming. His wife found him in the corner of their bedroom, clawing at his own face, his eyes wide with terror. He kept muttering about the shadows and the eyes in the trees. By morning, Samuel was dead, his body twisted in an unnatural position, his face frozen in a mask of horror. The stone he had taken was found on his bedside table, cracked clean in half. Word of Samuel's death spread quickly, and the railway project was abandoned. The graveyard was left untouched, swallowed once again by the forest. But the stories didn't end there. The witch's curse. Local legend spoke of a woman named Eleanor Blackwood, a healer who lived on the outskirts of the village in the late 1700s. Accused of witchcraft after several children fell ill, she was dragged to the graveyard by a mob and hanged from the largest tree in the center of the cemetery. Before she died, Eleanor cursed the land, vowing that no one who disturbed her resting place would ever find peace. For decades, strange occurrences were reported by those who ventured too close to the graveyard. Hunters spoke of hearing disembodied whispers and seeing shadowy figures darting between the trees. Children who wandered into the woods returned with stories of ghostly apparitions and the feeling of being watched. In 1923, a group of teenagers dared each other to spend the night in the graveyard. Only one of them, a boy named Thomas, made it out alive. He was found the next morning, wandering along the edge of the woods, his clothes torn and his skin covered in scratches. Thomas never spoke of what happened that night, but he refused to go near the woods again. He died in a mental institution years later, still muttering about the woman in the tree. The Forgotten Church. In the 1950s, a historian named Margaret Hensley became fascinated with the graveyard and its dark history. She discovered records of a small church that had once stood near the cemetery, a place where the villagers had gathered to pray for protection from the evil they believed lurked in the woods. The church had burned down in the late 1800s under mysterious circumstances, and its ruins were said to be hidden somewhere near the graveyard. Margaret organized an expedition to find the ruins, accompanied by 2 assistants and a local guide. They set out on a crisp autumn morning, armed with maps, flashlights, and a determination to uncover the truth. By nightfall, only the guide returned. He was incoherent, his face pale, and his hands trembling. The search party found no trace of Margaret or her assistants, only their equipment scattered near the edge of the graveyard. The guide refused to speak of what he had seen, but he left the village soon after and was never heard from again. The modern-day haunting. In recent years, the graveyard has become a hotspot for urban explorers and paranormal investigators, drawn by the legends and the promise of capturing proof of the supernatural. Few have dared to venture into the graveyard at night, and those who have returned with chilling stories. One group of investigators claimed to hear a woman's voice singing a mournful tune, though no one could pinpoint its source. Another reported seeing a figure hanging from the central tree, only for it to vanish when they approached. Equipment malfunctioned, batteries drained inexplicably, and several members of the group experienced sudden, overwhelming feelings of dread. Perhaps the most disturbing account came from a man named Daniel, who visited the graveyard alone in 2017. He live-streamed his exploration, joking about the legends and dismissing the warnings of his viewers. Halfway through the stream, Daniel froze, his flashlight illuminating a figure standing among the trees. It was a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by shadows. Daniel's live stream ended abruptly, and he was found hours later by a search party, unconscious at the edge of the woods. When he woke, he refused to speak of what he had seen, but his hair had turned completely white. The graveyard today. The forgotten graveyard remains a place of mystery and fear, its secrets buried beneath layers of time and tragedy. Locals still avoid the woods, warning outsiders to stay away. The stories persist, passed down through generations, each more chilling than the last. Perhaps the graveyard is simply a relic of the past, a place where the imagination runs wild. Or perhaps it is something more, a place where the veil between the living and the dead is thin, where the echoes of history refuse to be silenced. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the terrifying history of the forgotten graveyard is a story you will never forget.